My hands were shaking so badly, the mug rattled against the saucer. The smell was wrong. Hot metal and something oily, like a skillet left burning far too long. I set the coffee down and went to the living room to see whether I'd forgotten a lamp on. I opened the door, and the world became a wall of gray. Smoke rolled toward me like a living thing. My throat seized. I couldn't see the sofa, the bookcase, the quilt my mother had pieced by hand. A hiss crackled into a roar, orange ripping up the curtains as if a giant invisible fist had punched through my house. The alarm should have screamed. It didn't. Later, a man with a clipboard would inform me the battery had given up months earlier. A thing the size of a coin had cost me almost everything I owned. I am Marjorie Ellison. I was 66 the morning my life burned to cinders in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you're listening, please tap that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your words travel farther than you know, and today I need the company. I ran for the kitchen, coughing so hard I had to brace myself against the counter. The phone sat by the back door, thank God. I punched 911 and begged for help in a voice that didn't sound like mine. Heat pressed against my back. Glass popped somewhere near the dining room. I grabbed my purse because some primitive part of the brain remembers what matters: identification, keys, the little coin envelope where I kept emergency cash, and, though I didn't know it yet, the yellowed business card I hadn't looked at in 4 decades. I stepped into the yard just as the front window cracked with a sound like ice. Flames spilled out, hungry and quick. Mrs. Alvarez from next door wrapped a towel around my shoulders and said my name over and over, as if that could anchor me to the earth. Sirens rose, then bodies in heavy gear swarmed my lawn, and the street filled with neighbors who stared helplessly as a lifetime collapsed. The firefighters were swift and fierce, but the blaze had a head start. An old outlet had sparked, they told me later, and the fire had raced behind the walls. In an hour, everything my late husband and I had collected in 42 years, our wedding photos, the little nick in the wall with Caleb's height marks, the cedar chest with my winter sweaters, was a smoldering skeleton. That night, the Red Cross offered a cot in a shelter. A lovely volunteer pressed a packet of toiletries into my hand. It made me cry harder than the flames had. Mrs. Alvarez tried to keep me, but her grandchildren were sprawled across every spare bed. I stared at my smoke-stained hands and knew there was only one person I could ask. My son lived 25 minutes away in Ballantyne, in a townhouse development with gate codes and fountain ponds. Caleb Ellison had his father's gentle eyes and my stubborn chin. We'd been close when he was little. The last few years, phone calls had turned into quick check-ins between meetings, while holidays shrank to a couple of hours squeezed between trips with his fiancée. I borrowed Mrs. Alvarez's phone, mine had died inside the house, and called. "Caleb, it's Mom." "Mom?" Paper rustled, voices hummed in the background. "Everything okay?" "There was a fire," I said. The house is gone. Silence hit me like a cold wave. Are you hurt? I'm not hurt. Just, I don't have anywhere tonight. He cleared his throat. Come here. We'll figure it out. Relief buckled my knees. I nodded, even though he couldn't see. At dawn, I stood on the curb across from what used to be our home, while an insurance adjuster did his job with a small camera and careful distance. He said total loss, the way cashiers say receipt in the bag. He clicked his pen and explained deductibles and depreciation. We're probably talking 80 to 90,000, he added, as if a price could be stapled to 42 years of dinners and lullabies and birthdays. By afternoon, I was in a cab clutching a borrowed suitcase and my purse, staring out at streets that looked familiar and foreign all at once. The diner where Robert used to order biscuits and gravy on Sundays was still there. So was the park where I'd taught Caleb to ride a bike. But everything felt far away and small, as if I'd accidentally switched my life to a different channel. Caleb's townhouse smelled like lemon cleaner and new furniture. He opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching the driveway and pacing, and hugged me in that stiff way people use with relatives they love but don't quite understand. "Mom," he said, "come in." Sloane appeared behind him almost immediately. She wore white jeans and a silky top I was afraid to touch. She'd been friendly the couple of times we'd met. Careful friendly, the kind you learn in corporate meetings. She managed brand partnerships for a marketing firm uptown and could make the word boundaries sound like silk. "Marjorie," Sloane said, and kissed the air near my cheek. "We heard what happened. I can't imagine." It was a magazine house, cool grays, a glass coffee table you were afraid to smudge, matching frames with photos of their trips to Napa and Asheville. It didn't look like a place where you could cry without apologizing. "I won't be any trouble," I said, placing the suitcase against the console table. "Just a week or two until I line up an apartment and the insurance comes through. I can help with cooking, run errands. Truly, I'll keep to myself." Caleb looked at Sloane. It was a small look, but it told me everything. Couples pass information that way. Robert and I had done it for decades without knowing we were doing it. "Mom," Caleb started carefully, the way you approach a skittish horse. "We were talking. We want to support you. This is our space. We work late, Sloane's got a huge campaign, and I need quiet," Sloane added, not unkindly. "This is my sanctuary. We thought maybe a long-stay hotel might be better, something with a kitchenette so you can be comfortable. Caleb can cover a week or two. We researched a couple that are very safe." The word sanctuary dismantled me more efficiently than fire. My son's home was sacred. I was emergency. "I'm your mother," I said. It came out raw. I didn't mean for it to. Caleb's jaw worked. "We know, and we're here for you. We just have to do what's best for everyone." "For everyone?" I nodded, because I had been the woman who did what was best for everyone for 40 years. I remembered the baby who cried through colic while I walked circles around the den whispering, "Mama's here." I remembered the 10-year-old who missed a field trip because Robert had a weekend shift and I couldn't afford the $20. I made a picnic in the backyard and told him adventures live where your feet are. I remembered the teenager who stood on my porch with a broken heart. I made cocoa and said the line I'd said 1,000 times, "You're not alone." But standing there in the clean light of his front hall, suitcase by my ankles, I understood. I was. At least for tonight. I found a budget hotel off Johnston Road with a vacancy sign and carpets that had given up fighting. The clerk handed me a key card without looking at my face. The bed creaked when I sat. I stared at my hands until they stopped shaking, and then I opened my purse to count the money in the little coin envelope. That was when the business card slid out. It was the size of all business cards, which is to say too small to hold a life. Cream paper, edges softened by time. A name in blue ink, Jasper Whitaker. Under it, a number with an area code that hadn't existed when we were 25. On the back, in my own youthful scrawl, "Don't forget me, M." I hadn't, not for a single year. He was sunlight and summer roads and the feeling that anything might be possible if you only dared it. He'd left Charlotte for a job in Atlanta with plans to come back and put a ring on my finger the size of a promise. 2 letters every week for a while, then 1. Then a card at Christmas the year my father died. Then silence. I kept the card anyway, tucked behind my driver's license like a small bright stone you worry in your palm. 3 nights in that room did something to my spine. Back when Robert died, my grief had been the heavy, proper kind, the casseroles, the paperwork, the disbelief that softened into routine. This was different, raw and humiliating and loud. Next door, a couple argued every night about money and apologies. I pressed a towel into the crack under my door to block the hallway smell of old smoke. The insurance company sent emails with subject lines like, "Next steps." Caleb texted, "Have you found a place yet? I can send you a link." I didn't answer. On the 4th morning, the business card caught my eye the way a lighthouse catches your eye when you've been staring at a black horizon for too long. "Don't be ridiculous," I told the empty room. "You can't call a person after 40 years and say, 'Hi, it's me. Can you save me?'" But I was hungry in more ways than one. I wanted a human voice that remembered me when I was more than a problem to solve. I dialed before I could talk myself out of it. "Whitaker and Co.," a woman said brightly, and my stomach dropped. Of course he had a receptionist. Of course he was busy. "This is an old friend. Is Jasper in?" One moment, a click, a hum, and then a voice I had not heard since cassette tapes were things people used. "Jasper." I sat down hard. The bed squealed. "Jasper," I said, and my throat closed. "It's Marjorie. Marjorie Ellison. He didn't say a word for a heartbeat. When he did, it sounded like a door opening in spring. "Marjorie." "I shouldn't have called," I blurted. "My house, there was a fire. I'm fine. I'm in a motel, and I don't know what to do next. I should have called Caleb, but, well, I did. They're busy. I don't even know why I dialed. "Where are you?" he said. "Jasper, I'm not—" "Where are you?" he repeated, and there was iron under the velvet now. I told him. I heard a chair push back, a door swing, a car door thunked, an engine purred. "Stay put," he said, Don't check out. I'll be there in 40 minutes. You don't have to. Marjorie, he said softly, and 40 years vanished. Let me do this. At exactly 43 minutes, a dark blue car slid into the lot and stopped under the drooping pine. The driver's door opened. He stepped into the thick Carolina heat and looked straight up at my second-floor window, as if he knew which one was mine. Time had put silver at his temples and something steady in his shoulders. His eyes were still the color of honey held to the sun. I went down with my cheap suitcase, certain at the last minute I should run back upstairs and hide. But he was already moving toward me, hands in the pockets of his jacket, the way he always did when he didn't want to risk touching me too soon. "Hello, Marjorie," he said. His voice had that smile in it. "Hello," I managed. He studied my face the way people study a photo they once carried in their wallet. Then he reached for my suitcase with one hand and with the other touched my cheek, like a man checking whether something he'd kept safe in his mind had made it across time intact. "You found your way back," he said. I cried. Not the neat movie kind, the leaking, hiccuping, embarrassing kind on a strip of cracked asphalt beside a car I didn't know the price of. I cried because my house was gone, and because my son's sanctuary wasn't mine, and because a man who knew me when I was young had driven across town to stand in front of a motel and make me feel like a human being again. He didn't talk over it. He just stood with me until the sobs ran out of room. "Come on," Jasper said when I could breathe. "Let's go home." He lived north of the city, past Lake Norman, on land that used to be a farm. The driveway curved through oaks older than we were. When the house appeared, it didn't loom. It settled. Stone and cedar, wide porches with rockers, a long view to the water out back. Success had given Jasper grace. The place felt earned, not flaunted. I didn't know how to step through the door. My life had shrunk to the outline of a motel bed. He made it easy. He set my suitcase down in a sunny bedroom that smelled faintly of lavender. He showed me the bathroom with a deep tub, the closet with empty hangers, the stack of clean towels. He said, "I'm making soup. You'll eat, and then you'll sleep, and after that, we'll talk about next." In the kitchen, he moved like someone who had learned to feed himself well. When I reached for the chopping board out of habit, he smiled. "Tomorrow," he said, "tonight you sit." He ladled chicken soup into a wide white bowl and slid it in front of me with bread still warm from the oven. I took one spoonful and closed my eyes. Not because it was fancy, because it tasted like being taken care of for the first time in years. "Tell me," Jasper said. So I did. Robert's heart attack 15 years back. The mornings the house felt too quiet to hold me. The way Caleb's life had narrowed to a calendar of meetings and dinners where I didn't fit. I told him what the insurance man had said and what Sloan had called their house. I told him about the motel towel and the door and the business card in my purse. He listened like it mattered. When I finished, he put his hand over mine and said, "You're not a problem. You're a person I've been hoping would knock on my door for 40 years. I looked at our hands. Mine had the map of everything they'd done etched into them. His were strong, like I remembered, long-fingered, honest. "I'm not the girl you left behind," I said. "Good," he answered. "You were wonderful then. You're everything now." The clock over the stove ticked. The house exhaled. For the first time since the fire, I could imagine waking up somewhere without bracing. I slept 12 hours without dreaming. And the morning sunlight poured through sheer curtains. A note waited on the nightstand in Jasper's handwriting. Coffee on the porch, no hurry. I wrapped myself in a robe someone had laid over the end of the bed and padded toward the smell of dark roast and butter. He was on the back porch at a small table with 2 mugs and a plate of toast with peach preserves. The lake beyond the trees looked like brushed metal. Birds gossiping in the branches sounded busy and alive. "This place is too much for one man," Jasper said when I sat. "I built it anyway. I told myself one day I'd fill it with noise. I suppose I did. But it's the wrong kind. It's contractors and meetings and phones that won't stop." "Why didn't you marry?" I asked. It was impolite and exactly what I wanted to know. "I almost did," he said. "Twice. Good women. The timing didn't care." What does that mean? It means a man can stand in a room full of everything he asked for and know there's a thing missing people will call foolish if he says it out loud. He sipped his coffee. "I never learned how to stop listening for your voice." I set my mug down because my hands weren't steady. "Let me help you get your life back," Jasper said, simple as weather. "We'll go slow. You call the shots, but you're not sleeping in a motel again." I didn't have anything to give a man like that. I said so. He shook his head and smiled, the way he always had when I got stubborn about checks at diners. "Marjorie, I have money. Time, I don't. Don't you dare waste either." He gave me gentleness and space, and that particular kind of attention you only get from someone who truly remembers who you were. A week passed while we moved carefully around each other, 2 older people practicing the art of being new again. He had a housekeeper 3 days a week. On the other days, I started to cook, not to earn my keep, to say thank you in my own language. On the 9th day, my phone lit with Caleb's name. "Mom," he said, "I've been by your motel twice. They said you checked out. Where are you?" "Staying with a friend," I said, and watched light move across Jasper's kitchen floor. "What friend?" "A kind one." Sloane's voice floated from somewhere near his shoulder. "Ask her if she needs us to pick her up." Caleb covered the receiver badly. "We were thinking you could take the guest room for a week, just until you find something. We may have overreacted." "What changed?" I almost asked. "Did a neighbor mention seeing your mother step out of a car that costs as much as a starter home? Did the story sound better retold that way?" "That's kind," I said. "I'm fine where I am." He didn't know what to do with a mother who said no. I could hear him frown. At least tell me the address. I will, I promised. And then I didn't. That night, I stood on the porch after Jasper went to bed. The air was sweet with cut grass and something blooming I couldn't name. I looked up at a sky I hadn't paused to notice in years, and I said, "Thank you," out loud, not sure whether I was addressing God or blind luck or the foolish, stubborn girl who had tucked a business card into a wallet and decided not to throw it away. I didn't understand then that the hardest part hadn't come, that before this story curled toward joy, it would pass through the old ache and the new boundary. But right then, at the edge of a lake with a mug cooling in my hands, I believed in the sentence Jasper had spoken with a calm I could feel down to my bones. You found your way back. The first 2 weeks were a lesson in a new kind of quiet. Not the hollow hush of an empty house after a funeral, but the soft, living quiet of a place where you can hear yourself think without hearing yourself judge. Jasper worked from a glass-walled office over the garage on Mondays and Thursdays. The rest of the week, he drove into the city to a suite with his name behind frosted glass. He came home with a loosened tie and the relief of a man who had made 1,000 decisions and wanted to make none. We fell into rhythms that would have made 25-year-old us laugh: an early walk under the oaks, an afternoon nap if the heat begged for it, the long, easy conversation that wandered through memory and into plans. I cooked the dishes my mother taught me on a stove older than me, but in Jasper's kitchen, they tasted new. He ate like a grateful man, not a rescued one. Once, after a plate of braised short ribs that made him close his eyes halfway through, he said, "If I had known soup and Sunday dinners could make me feel this, I would have built this house with a kitchen and nothing else." "People don't cook for you?" I teased. "People have cooked for me," he said. "It's not the same thing as being fed." On a Tuesday, when the air felt like warm water, I took a taxi across town to stand on the edge of what used to be my street. The city had already put up orange fencing around the blackened footprint of my house. A yellow notice flapped on a stake, "Unsafe to enter." The maple tree I planted when Caleb turned 5 was scorched on one side and green on the other, a stubborn banner of survival. "Hey there, Miss Ellison." The mailman, Mr. Briggs, still made his rounds out of habit. He put a gloved hand on my shoulder. "We all miss you on this block." "Me too," I said. "Got a P.O. box we can forward to?" I gave him the address of Jasper's office and felt strange doing it. He scribbled and nodded and said, "You always kept the best yard," which made me bite my lip hard enough to taste iron. In the ash, I spotted something glazed and pale, one of the porcelain birds from the mantel miraculously intact. I climbed the curb and picked it up. It was soot-streaked and a little obscene sitting lonely in a ruin, but it felt like a message. You can't live here anymore. Take what you can carry and walk toward the light. Back at Jasper's, I washed the little bird and set it on the kitchen windowsill. It looked right there, a small white witness to the fact that sometimes what's left is enough to begin again. That night, after we ate, Jasper said, "I want to show you something," and led me down the hall to a room I hadn't noticed. He opened a drawer in a desk that looked like it had grown straight out of a tree. Inside were neat stacks of letters tied with ribbon, a little ridiculous for any other man, but perfectly reasonable for him. "I kept these," he said, "from you." "I stopped writing," I said, throat tight. "I married Robert." "I know. You told me. I kept them anyway." He lifted the stack, and the smell of old paper and ink rose like a ghost. "I told myself I'd give them back to you someday." I read them sitting on the floor next to him. There was my 25-year-old voice on cheap stationery, telling him about the woman in my office who clicked her pen too loudly, about the way the heat lay on the city like a blanket, about how I missed him when I saw a man in a red truck that looked like his. I had forgotten that girl's laugh. Hearing it in my own handwriting broke me and mended me in the same breath. Jasper's hand covered mine, then stayed. "I don't want to make our second act out of apologizing for the first." "Me either," I said. The phone rang the way phones ring when they're about to deliver something you didn't ask for. I recognized Caleb's name and steadied myself. I had promised to call with an address. I hadn't. The phone had tattled anyway. "Mom," he said, "where are you living?" "With a friend." "Which friend?" "You wouldn't know him." Silence, sharp as a paper cut. "We'd like to see where you are, to make sure you're safe." Safe meant respectable. It meant expensive enough to talk about at dinner with Sloane's colleagues. I took a breath. "Sunday, 2:00. I'll pin you the gate code." Jasper watched my face when I hung up. "How much do you want me in this?" "Beside me," I said. "Not in front, not behind." He nodded. "Beside it is." They arrived 5 minutes early in a car that tried hard to look humble. Sloane wore linen and carried a tote that cost rent. Caleb's tie had the kind of blue you see in corporate logos. They looked like they were coming to a showroom appointment, not to their mother's life. Sloane took in the sweep of the driveway, the porch, the quiet, the lake. She rearranged her expression into admiration. "What a lovely property," she said, the way people say, "What a clever presentation." Jasper extended a hand. "Jasper Whittaker." Caleb shook it. His smile was too big. "Thank you for looking after my mom." Jasper's reply was simple. "It's a privilege." We sat in the kitchen because that was the only room I could bear to sit in with them. I made tea and set out lemon squares on a plate like I was hosting colleagues. Sloane complimented the cabinetry. Caleb asked about Jasper's work. He knew exactly who Jasper was by then. You could feel the research quivering under his polite questions. "And how do you two know each other?" Sloane asked finally. "We were each other's first dumb luck," Jasper said. Then softer, "And maybe our last smart choice." Sloane did a quick smile like a paper cut, a flash and then gone. Caleb toyed with his teaspoon. "Mom, we're sorry about the other day. We panicked. There's a lot on our plates. We should have made space." "I needed you," I said, and watched the words land. "I know." He looked down. We didn't handle it right. Sloane put a hand on his arm. We have a right to our boundaries, she said gently to him, then turned to me. But we also have a responsibility to family. She was good at this. She could apologize and defend herself in the same breath. I had always been the woman who smoothed, the woman who said, "It's all right, I understand," when her heart was in pieces. The woman who sent her son home with leftovers and swallowed the things she wanted to say. But my house had taught me how quickly a wall could go from sturdy to soot. I will always be your mother, I told Caleb. That's not something I can resign from. But I won't live in a space where I am tolerated. If you want me in your life, it has to be because you want me, not because you need to look like the kind of people who take care of their own. He flushed. Sloane stiffened. Jasper set a glass of water near my hand like a quiet anchor. Caleb nodded eventually. Okay, he said. What does that look like? Phone calls you don't make in the car. Dinners where we talk about more than your calendar. Invitations that don't arrive after you've checked if Sloane's colleagues are free. And when an emergency happens, you open the door first and discuss the plans second. He looked young then, so young. My baby in a man-suit. I can do that, he said. Sloane's voice was calm. We can do that. They left an hour later with small containers of soup because I am who I am. At the door, Caleb hugged me for a beat too long and said, "He seems solid," in a tone that meant, "He seems rich." I did not say, "Solid is the word you should have used about me the afternoon I was standing on your rug with a suitcase and a heart on fire." When the gate clicked shut behind them, I leaned against the door and let my shoulders drop. Jasper came up behind me and rested his chin in that place on my shoulder where a man's head fits like it belongs. You were kind, he said, and true. They think this is about money, I said. They think everything is, he answered. He turned me gently. We get to decide what this is about. After that Sunday, something in me stood up straighter. Jasper took me to a dinner once a week where the napkins were ironed and the bread came with 6 kinds of butter. He introduced me to people who ran theaters and shelters and city programs and asked them questions like, "What would make your job easier?" When the check came, "Why do you do that?" I asked as we walked to the car one night. "Because anybody can buy an entree," he said. "It takes listening to buy a good idea." I started taking a bus once a week back to my old neighborhood, a strange pilgrimage I couldn't explain. I brought Mrs. Alvarez homemade chicken salad and a loaf of bread. We sat at her tiny table and laughed too loudly about television shows and the way time collapses when you're not looking. Before I left, I walked past the fenced ruin and put my hand on the maple. "You did good, buddy," I whispered to the bark, because it had. Half a tree can still be a tree. On a Thursday, thick with rain, Jasper came home with a folder and spread papers across the kitchen island. "Your lot," he said. The city will clear the debris next month. You have options, such as sell the land, build again, plant a garden and a bench, and use it like a pocket park for your block. He smiled. I've seen women turn their hardest spot into a place where life sits down. What would you do? I'd ask what story you want the ground to tell. I slept with the folder on my nightstand like a book I wanted to finish. In the morning, I knew. I'm going to sell, I told him over eggs. And I want to start something that helps other women after fires, the part after the Red Cross leaves, the first month, the one that hollows you out. Jasper looked at me like I had just invented a useful tool. Then that's what we'll do. We called it the First 30. It wasn't a big charity with a glossy brochure. It was a small, strong thing with clear rules. Emergency housing for 30 days, a grocery stipend, a volunteer who did laundry and sat at a kitchen table and listened. We worked through an existing nonprofit because I didn't need to become a CEO. I needed to become the woman I had looked for the night I handed a motel clerk my last $40. Jasper wrote a generous check. I wrote the program manual in my new, careful script. Where to buy a prepaid phone, who to call for prescriptions, which secondhand store had dignity on the racks. Mrs. Alvarez baked cookies and play-acted intake calls with me at her table until we could both answer questions without crying. Caleb called more. Real calls, not drive-by updates. He didn't always understand my new life, but he was practicing curiosity instead of control. Sloane stayed courteous and pointed. She asked how the First 30 would measure outcomes while she salted her salad. I swallowed a comment about measuring hearts and said, "We count stabilized households at day 30 and at day 90. You learn to speak 2 languages if you want to stand in the same room." A month after that first Sunday, Caleb stood on Jasper's porch without Sloane and asked if he could come in. He looked serious and tired. I made coffee because that's how women in my family armor up. He stared at the steam like it might arrange his thoughts. "I did a selfish, thoughtless thing," he said. "I said no when you needed yes. I'm sorry." He took a breath. "I keep replaying the way you stood in my doorway with that suitcase. I keep hearing you say, 'I'm your mother,' and I hear me say, 'We need privacy.' I can't believe I said that." "People say unkind things when they are protecting something," I said. "What was I protecting, Mom?" "The life you thought would break if you let me into it." He rubbed his jaw. "That's ugly." "It's human," I said. "Ugly and human." He reached across the counter and took my hand the way little boys do when a parking lot scares them. "Can we start over?" "We can do better," I said. "Starting over implies we go back to the rules that made the first try fail." He laughed, a small, dry sound that was almost a cough, and nodded. "Okay, new rules." I wrote them on an index card the way my mother wrote recipes so they could live in a drawer and be reached for when needed. We tell the truth quickly. We call before the emergency. We show up when showing up matters. We forgive, but we do not forget the lesson. He slipped the card into his wallet with a carefulness that made me want to kiss his forehead like we were late for second grade. "What's the fourth for?" he asked. "So we learn," I said. "Otherwise, apologies are just confetti." 2 nights later, Sloan texted me a link to a curated registry for their spring wedding with a note that read, "No pressure. We're so excited to celebrate with you." I stared at the screen and felt the old ache and the new boundary square off inside my chest. The registry cost more than my first car. A week later, she sent a tasting invitation and a spreadsheet with a color palette. I bought a small handmade bowl from a potter on Central Avenue and wrote a card that said, "May the things you put in this dish be small and sweet and shared." Then I put the phone away. By then, the idea that had been fluttering between Jasper and me settled like a bird landing. It didn't feel like a rescue when it arrived. It felt like a conclusion. He proposed in the garden at dusk, with the lake turning pewter and the cicadas tuning their small fiddles. He didn't kneel. Our knees didn't love that anymore. He took my hands in his and said, "Marjorie Ellison, I am down to the useful parts of me. I want to spend them with you." "I don't need a big dress," I said, "because some girls remain practical." "I need your yes," he said. "Yes," I answered, and it felt like a door opening in my chest. We decided on November, when the air in North Carolina remembers how to be crisp and honest. Jasper said we could invite the mayor. I said I wanted to invite Mrs. Alvarez and the maple tree, if that were possible. We compromised on a backyard ceremony with the pastor who used to bless Jasper's job sites and 4 witnesses with cake afterward. "Should we invite Caleb?" Jasper asked gently. "Yes," I said. And then, Sloan. The name scratched my throat on the way out. "That's up to you," he said. I waited 3 days and then texted my son. "November 11th, 2 p.m., backyard. You are welcome. Sloan is welcome at the reception only. I mean no unkindness. I am defending the part of the day that belongs to vows and history." He wrote back a few minutes later, "We'll be there." I sat on the porch with my phone in my lap and let the breeze argue with my hair. Jasper came out with a blanket and tucked it around my shoulders, the way you do for people you love when the temperature drops 15 degrees and you are not yet ready to go inside. Sometimes happiness announces itself with fireworks. Sometimes it puts a blanket over your knees and sits quietly beside you until you admit you're warm. The night before the wedding, Caleb came by alone. He had a small box and nervous hands. He set the box on the counter and said, "This was Dad's. It should be there tomorrow." Inside lay Robert's gold watch, the one I had worn in the early years after he died, when I wanted to feel the weight of a thing that had kept time for a good man. "Thank you," I whispered. "I've been wrong about a lot," he said into his sleeve, "but not about you deserving to be happy." I leaned forward and pressed my forehead to his. It was something we hadn't done since he was 7 and feverish. "Learn wrong quickly," I said. "That's the trick." He laughed and nodded and left, promising to be early. When the door closed, I looked around Jasper's kitchen and thought, a person can survive fire and still be afraid of joy. Then I put the watch on the counter next to the frosted cake Mrs. Alvarez had carried in with both hands like a newborn. I slept deeply, warm under a blanket I hadn't known I needed until someone offered it. The morning came bright, all coins and angles. November sunlight has a way of making everything look crisp around here, as if the world had decided to iron itself before church. Jasper brewed coffee and hummed something from the 70s under his breath. My dress hung where I could see it from bed, azure blue, long enough to show respect to my knees, simple enough to make the point. I wore Robert's watch for blessing and balance. I pinned my mother's silver brooch at my shoulder because none of us do anything alone. Jasper's pastor stood under the maple at the edge of the lawn, the one we transplanted from a nursery because we couldn't invite the scorched tree and had to make do with a cousin. 4 chairs faced him. Mrs. Alvarez wore her best Sunday hat. Jasper's business partner, Marcus, wore a suit he had stopped apologizing for being tight in, and he cried from the opening prayer to the cake. Our housekeeper, Lydia, stood between them, cheeks wet and hands clasped in that way women have when they are rooting for something with their whole ribs. Caleb arrived on time. He hugged me with that careful gentleness men use when they remember you were once the safest place in the world. He shook Jasper's hand and meant it. Sloane came 10 minutes later in a silk dress and glossy heels, took a seat at the back, and folded her hands like a good sport. I had thought my legs might wobble. They didn't. The vows were the simplest thing we did that day. I promised to use what I had left to make him less alone. He promised to spend the soft parts of his life taking care. The pastor said, "You may kiss your wife." And Jasper did, like a man who had waited 4 decades to be given permission in front of God and a maple. Applause felt silly and excellent. We cut the cake on the porch with Mrs. Alvarez directing my hand because she didn't trust Jasper with buttercream. Sloane stayed polite and largely silent until we were nearly through with coffee. Then she touched my arm and said, very softly, "You look beautiful. Congratulations." A sentence can carry the weight of a white flag. I saw the corner of the life she wanted with my son, the polished one, and the place where my presence had complicated the picture. For once, I didn't feel like a corner that didn't match. I felt like a color the room had needed. A week later, Caleb asked to take me to lunch, just the 2 of us. We went to a small place in Dilworth, where the waiter called everybody friend. He pushed salad around his plate for a while, and then came to it the way he always had, when he was braver than he felt. "Sloane and I have been talking," he said. My shoulders tightened of their own accord. He saw it and lifted a hand. "It's not about boundaries. It's about the future." Whose? Everyone's. He took a breath so big it wobbled his glasses. I want to understand your plans, financially. What you're doing with the insurance settlement. Whether Jasper is, I don't know, putting things in your name. I'm not asking to be nosy. He flushed. I'm asking because I'm your son, and I need to know you're protected. If he had asked me what made my marriage work, I'd have told him this. Jasper doesn't make me defend my joy. He asks how to help, and then he says, all right. He doesn't call my happiness a spreadsheet. I appreciate the concern, I said, and used the word because it was true. Here is what you need to know. I sold the lot. The money and a donation from Jasper fund the first 30. I have my own accounts and a financial planner whose job it is to be the fussy one. Jasper and I have a prenuptial agreement that protects us both. If you're asking about inheritance, that is a conversation for a different table on a different day, one where we talk about values before numbers. He looked both chastened and relieved. Okay, he said, I can live with that. Good, I said, because I waited a long time to live with this. After lunch, he walked me to my car and stood there fidgeting. Mom? What's the right way to apologize for the day at my door? The way you've been doing it, I said, by being better, by not making me teach you your lessons twice. He laughed then, really laughed, threw his head back the way he used to when he ran through sprinklers. You're different, he said. I'm myself, I replied, and it was the truest thing I'd said that year. Winter in Charlotte can be shorts on Tuesday and scarves on Thursday. We learned how to do it together. Jasper taught me the names of birds at the feeder. I taught him how to fold fitted sheets in a way that makes a person believe in small miracles. On Saturdays, we drove into town to the shelter where the First 30 kept its little office. We installed shelves and stocked them with dignity. New toothbrushes, clean socks, a stack of prepaid phones bought in bulk. I kept a list of women's names, and when one of them moved into her new apartment, I wrote keys next to it and drew a heart. You look like a woman on fire, Jasper said, smiling at his own poor joke. I look like a woman who knows what to do with one, I said. Caleb and Sloane married in April at a venue with chandeliers that pretended to be stars. I wore a navy dress and held my head up. Jasper wore a tie Sloane picked and an expression that said he would carry me out if it turned into a movie we didn't like. At the reception, Sloane's father raised a glass and talked about mergers and growth. Jasper raised a glass and talked about mercy. When it was my turn, I said only, "May you always choose each other on the hard days," and sat down to clap with everyone else. Sloane asked me to dance. Halfway through a Frank Sinatra song, she said, "I'm not good at being wrong." Her voice had the fragile courage of someone stepping onto a thin branch. "You're good at many other things," I said, Practice this one." She smiled, a real one this time, and nodded. After the wedding, Caleb visited more, sometimes alone, sometimes with takeout that he insisted on paying for, sometimes with a question I recognized as the real kind. "How did you know Dad was the person?" he asked once while Jasper and I washed dishes like an old commercial. "I didn't," I said. "I guessed. Then I kept choosing the guess until it turned into a fact." "How did you know Jasper was the person?" "I didn't," I said again, but the second time I recognized the feeling. He thought about that with his whole face. "I want that," he said. "You'll have it," I told him, because there are things a mother is allowed to promise even when the world says not to. Sometime in June, the city finished clearing my old lot. A developer bought it faster than paper dries. I drove by and blessed the ground with my hand anyway. I didn't need to stand on the old square to know where I belonged. The first 30 grew because the world kept sending people who needed it and people who wanted to help. We held no galas. We hosted potlucks. Lydia taught a class on cooking in small spaces. Mrs. Alvarez taught budgeting with envelopes in 3 colors. Jasper stood with me at a city meeting and said, "The first month is the hinge. Choose wisely where it swings." And I loved him so hard, it felt like prayer. On our first anniversary, he gave me a gift that wasn't expensive and cost more than anything he'd ever bought me. A small frame for the business card that started this chapter. "Hang it in your office," he said. "When you wonder if you're foolish, look at it and remember, sometimes foolish is just faith with dirty hands." We celebrated with lemon cake on the porch while the lake did its trick of making time look like it had slowed. My phone buzzed with a text. It was a photo from Caleb. A smoky kitchen, a pan he'd left too long on the burner, a black circle in the middle. "First mistake as a married man," it read. "Sloan says we need a fire extinguisher and better pans. What do we actually need?" I wrote back, "A new pan, a smoke detector with a fresh battery, and a promise. When you smell trouble, open a window. When you see flames, ask for help, earlier than you think you should." "Copy that," he replied. 10 seconds later, "Thanks, Mom." I put the phone face down and breathed in the lemon and the dusk and the man who set a slice on my plate like a benediction. "Sometimes I think about the woman in that motel room," Jasper said, "and I want to go back and tell her to hang on." "She did," I said. He squeezed my hand. "I know." People ask, even now, if I forgave Caleb. They ask in that hungry way people ask when they are really asking for themselves. The answer is yes, and also not all at once, and not in the way movies teach you. Forgiveness, I learned, is less like a light switch and more like a dimmer you push with patience. It doesn't erase a thing. It lets you see everything else around it. He will never ask me to sleep on a hotel bed again. I will never forget that he once did. We hold both truths and eat dinner on Thursdays. I am 67 now. In the mirror, I see my mother's mouth, and my father's stubborn lines around the eyes. I see a woman who lost a house and found a home. I see the youngness in old love and the steadiness in a second chance. I see a volunteer pin that says the first 30 over my heart, and I straighten it before I walk out the door, the way my mother straightened my collar before school. When I lock the house at night, I check the detectors, because some lessons get to become rituals. When I slide into bed, I thank the God of small mercies for soap that smells like lavender, for soup on the stove, for a husband who reads the paper out loud and kisses me in the middle of a sentence. If you find yourself on a curb with smoke in your hair and nowhere to go, I am telling you this so you can tuck it into your pocket like a card. You are not a problem. You are a person. Call someone who used to love you. If they answer with the voice you remember, let them help. If they don't, call someone new. And if the phone stays quiet, come find us. We built a front porch with a light that stays on. That little porcelain bird sits on my kitchen windowsill. Some mornings, the sun hits it just right, and it throws a small shine across the sink. It is ridiculous, and it is perfect. It reminds me that not everything breaks, and not everything that breaks stays broken. Did you stay until the end? Thank you, truly. Tell me in the comments which city you're listening from, and whether you've ever had to start over. Your stories help other hearts steady. If this moved you, tap like and subscribe so more people find it. On the screen, you'll see 2 more real-life stories I think you'll love. Until next time, may your home be warm, your boundaries kind, and your second chances brave.